Welcome everyone once again. My name is Bert Salazar and I am the host for the Bert Salazar Retirement Show, which is the only one, right now airing on Facebook Live. So once again, I'm excited to be here with all of you. So that's something very, very important for me because at the end of the day, my number one goal for each and every one of you is to not only give you information, but also give you education, because information without education always leads to failure. Now, over the last 30 years, it's the time that I've been in my business, both as a tax planner and also as a retirement strategist. I have reviewed thousands and thousands of financial plans that have been done by other advisors when we have clients coming into our offices for the first time. And one of the challenges that I have seen, and I've seen more of this over the last 10 years and at any point in time, is that 99.9% of the plans that I have reviewed personally, not including the ones that my staff does, have all failed. There's no plan that would ever make it to the promised land because of the fact that the vast majority of advisors are using numbers and theories that are never going to happen. So one of the decisions that I made in my practice about 15 years ago was to make a paradigm shift and, thinking not to the fact that I wanted to be all things to all people, but the fact that I just want to be some things to some people. And if I'm able to do that, then I'm able to segment the type of people that I want to get in front of, because I primarily deal with people that are pre-retirees and retirees. So usually the type of people that I deal with are people that are anywhere between the ages of 55 and 64. So they're about 5 to 10 years away from retirement, or some of them are already in retirement. Now, some of the clients that I have are north of 65 and some are south of 55. But obviously that's a market that I'm in. So because of that, my goal has always been to bring a lot of information and education to the marketplace. I have a pretty large client base, and I also have a pretty large online community, and obviously you're a part of it. So I want to thank you. If you're joining me on Facebook Live today, please make sure that you say hi. I'm doing it by myself, so I may not be able to answer any of your questions, but at least if you can make some comments and you can share, then that can help the entire community from a business perspective. So today I want to spend a little bit of time and I want to talk to you about the fatal four of retirement. And I wrote some bullet points so that way I don't forget as I go through them. But the challenge that we have in retirement is that most of the people that put together a retirement plan do it from an offense as opposed to a defense. And the vast majority of these plans are going to fail at some point in time because one of four things, or actually a multiple of the following four things, more than likely are going to happen to you in retirement. So if you're able to put together financial planning, which you're going to be protecting against, you're going to be securing certain risks that all of us are going to have to face in retirement, then I would argue that your retirement plan is in a much, much better position than it would have been otherwise. And the four major risks that I want to talk to you about today is the risk of dying too soon and the impact that would have not only on yourself, but also on your family overall. I want to spend a little bit of time on the risk of living too long, which is now happening quite often because Americans are living a lot longer than ever before. But with that comes a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, and tremendous, financial impact that the vast majority of you, I would argue 100% of you, are not ready for. The third risk that I want to talk about today has nothing to do with living too long or dying too soon, but it has to do with living with a disability and the fact that the vast majority of Americans are going to be facing long-term care issues and concerns in the near future. And then last but not least, and that would be the fourth risk, is the risk of eroding factors, and there are 10 of them. So I'm not going to mention all 10, but taxes, inflation, stock market volatility, interest rate volatility, propensity to consume, and so forth. For me, the definition of an eroding factor is anything that can erode the value of your money. Let me drink a little bit of water on an ongoing basis. So if you can walk away with a couple of ideas from this Facebook Live retirement show today, then I think you're going to be in a much better position. So first, I want to spend a little bit of time in talking about the importance of managing the risk of the fatal four in retirement. And what's important is that protecting retirement security is a must from a business perspective for all of you on this call. And that's something that either you're going to have to do or your financial advisor is going to have to do for you and try to figure out somewhere, somehow. The second issue is that, life happens. Things are going to happen in your life that are totally unexpected. You can never forecast a financial outcome. And one of the major problems that many of our clients have for that when they first come see us is that their financial advisors have been forecasting their financial outcome for years, and none of it is going to happen because you cannot forecast a financial outcome. Another point that I want to make here is that chances are that your retirement is not going to be as you thought it would be. So your retirement is not going to be anywhere near what you thought it would be. If you really do a good job, then you're going to get close to it, but there's no such a thing as a perfect retirement plan. So you have to be able to move around and deal with all the booby traps that life is going to be throwing at you from a business perspective, and then be able to, as we used to do in the Marine Corps, you have to be able to adjust, adapt, and improvise as you go along. And then last but not least, you need to have a retirement balance. You need to have a balance between your offense and your defense. Most of the plans that I review, the clients have done a fairly decent job in managing, the accumulation of assets and so forth. But when it comes to managing the booby traps or the fatal four, they have done a horrible job. And it's just like playing football. The offense is going to bring a lot of people to the stands, but the defense is going to win championships and Super Bowls. So how do you balance one with the other is something that is going to be very important to you. Now, I do videos and webinars where I go into a lot more detail, but this is a Facebook Live show, so I'm just giving you some of the bullet points that hopefully are going to make you think and start thinking outside of the box. Now, let's talk a little bit about the risk of dying too soon. There's an economic impact. And I can tell you there's an economic impact because I've been in this industry 30 years and I have delivered close to 20, death benefit claims over the last 30 years. And there's always an economic impact. One of the first things that I can tell you, and this is something that I have experienced personally because, the first death claim that I delivered was for my cousin, and she was 45 years old and she died of breast cancer. And that was many, many years ago. So, we were both fairly young then at that point in time, and she passed away at the age of 45. I can tell you the following: no one ever, ever, ever dies at the right time. So I don't care what day you pick to die, more than likely it's not going to be the right time. And there are all kinds of things that will impact your family, from a business standpoint. Not only no one ever dies at the right time, the second thing that I can share with you is, I have never met a widow that did not believe in life insurance. And this is something that I deal with on an ongoing basis because when I talk to many of the clients, I realize that the vast majority of the clients that come to see me for the first time, when it comes to protecting the risk of dying too soon, very few of them are fully insured. Most of the people that I visit with, they're underinsured. And it's just like if you buy a Mercedes-Benz for $60,000, would you ever go to your auto insurance company and try to insure that $60,000 automobile for $30,000? You would never think of doing something like that. And the same thing would happen with your home and your jewelry and stuff like that that you own. But when it comes to your human life value calculation, all of you are doing the same, and most of you are doing a lot less than that. So, that's a shame, and that's probably lack of education and understanding how insurance products work. But that's something that is something very, very important. One of the main reasons why I put a lot of emphasis in making certain that our clients always have their economic value in protection is that, just so you'll know, now in case you don't know this, but I just want to share a couple of things with you. The probability of death is 100%. Hopefully all of you know this. I know you do. I'm just making a joke. But the probability of death is 100%. Yet most of you are protecting your families with less than 20% of your economic life value. Now, in another segment, I'll talk a little bit about how to determine your economic life value. We can talk about the different products and services that are available, and most important, the different uses that life insurance brings to the forefront. Obviously, there are two ways that you can manage, the risk of dying too soon. You can self-insure, so that way you're not going to have any type of insurance product protecting the risk of dying too soon. And you can self-insure because you may feel comfortable or you have enough assets saved that you can mitigate any of those circumstances. I have met maybe one or two of my clients that find themselves in that position. Most of them think they are, but when you start going through the numbers, they realize that they're not, and then they do something about it. So you can either self-insure or you can self-assure. There's a difference between self-insure and self-assure. When you self-assure, you basically understand the risk, you understand the liability, and you're willing to pass that liability and that risk to an insurance company in exchange for an annual or a monthly premium payment. You could do it quarterly, you can do it semi-annually, and so forth. But you're transferring that risk from yourself, so you don't self-insure anymore, to a self-assuring program in which you're transferring that risk to an insurance company that knows how to manage risk a hell of a lot better than you'll ever will, and that I ever will, because that's a job that they're into. By the way, if the world were to end tomorrow, there are only going to be 3 creatures left in the world. You're going to have sharks, you're going to have rats, and then you're going to have life insurance companies, because they truly know how to manage risk. So that's something very important. Understand the difference between self-insurance and self-assurance. Now, the risk is not going to go away because there's 100% probability of it, but how do you manage the risk and how do you pay for the risk? And the ultimate outcome, that's where the economics come into play from that perspective. Now, I talked a little bit about the economic life value, and all of us have one. I don't care if you're a stay-at-home mom, you have a major economic house value. I don't care life value. I don't care if you're a business owner and you do extremely well or you do average. I don't care if you're a professional. I don't care if you're an employee or a blue-collar employee working for a company. All of us have a human life value calculation that goes back to the early 1900s that was put together by Huebner back at that point in time. And he was an economist, and he started to talk about human life value calculations back then. So all of us have one. Now, the other thing is, well, once you decide to self-assure and transfer that risk from yourself to an insurance company, then the next question is, well, what company are you going to use? What product are you going to use? What percentage of that liability are you going to assure? Which are the beneficiaries are you going to be placing into those contracts? How is the titling of the contract going to be? Are you going to own it directly yourself, or is this going to be owned by a trust? How are the beneficiaries going to be designated, and what percentages are they going to be receiving themselves? So when it comes to managing the risk of dying too soon, there are a lot of questions and concerns that need to be addressed. Are you going to buy a term product where there's going to be limited protection? Or are you going to buy a permanent product because of the fact that you just don't know when you're going to die? Now, remember, I said the probability of death is 100%. The only problem is you don't know when you're going to die. Are you going to live a long life? Are you going to live a short life and have a premature death? Or are you going to have an average life based on your mortality? So those are things that are very critical whenever we do an audit of an existing financial plan for a client that comes to see me for the first time. I go through all of these points in order to identify, what are the different, what is the different type of things that we can do and the course of action that we may have to take. Okay. Now, next, I want to talk about the second of the fatal four, which is not the risk of dying too soon, but it is the risk of living too long, which is going to be very prevalent for each and every one of you from that perspective. Now, the vast majority of Americans are living a long life. Each and every one of you listening to this Facebook Live today, more than likely are going to live a long life. Living a long life could be a good thing, and living a long life could be a really bad thing, because if you live long enough, all of the things that we're talking about are going to happen to you anyways. Now, one of the major problems that I see with people that are living too long is that Americans are spenders and they're not savers. So the vast majority of Americans have not saved enough in order to make certain that they don't run out of money before they run out of life. Now, I would argue, and this is fairly sad, most of you listening to me are probably going to run out of money before you run out of life, unless you take exigent action and you make exigent and you take exigent circumstances and the things that you need to do in order to prevent that liability of living too long and running out of money before you run out of life. Now, mortality in the United States, this is the average ages that people live to. Mortality has been increasing over the last 30, 40 years. The reason for that is health, medical technology. What used to kill us 30, 40 years ago is no longer doing that. It may leave you disabled, but it's no longer killing you. So people are living a lot longer today than ever before. Actually, the fastest growing generation in the US are people between the ages of 85 and 105 from a mortality standpoint. So if you're retiring at the age of 65, you have to be able to plan for 3 decades. And those are the decades that I call the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. I'm not going to go into a lot of details on that, but you have to be able to plan for 3 decades. What if I have a number of public safety employees that are clients of mine, FBI, DEA, Customs, ATF, local law enforcement departments. And these officers have an early retirement because they get to retire in the early to mid 50s. Now, from that perspective, they have a guaranteed pension, but most of the time that guaranteed pension is not enough. These people have to plan not only for 3 decades, they have to plan for 4 decades in retirement, because there's a very high probability that they're going to be living a long, long life. And by the way, if you're married and you're 65 years of age today, there's almost a 50% probability that one of you is going to be alive at age 93. So how do you plan for all that period from a business standpoint? That becomes a major issue from an economic standpoint. Now, how do you overcome 30 years of retirement? How do you overcome 40 years of retirement? Where are your assets positioned? Are your assets going to be able to deal with the increase in taxes? Are your assets going to be able to deal with stock market volatility, especially at a point in your life where you may have no choice but to start taking distribution out of those assets, because now you're in full retirement mode and you need to maintain your standard of living. And all of a sudden your 401k is becoming a 201k because the market has taken a tremendous amount of beating. So is your retirement plan today going to be able to overcome that? How about inflation? Is your retirement plan going to be able to stay ahead of inflation? How about if you have any type of healthcare issues? What if you all of a sudden have long-term care issues? You cannot perform two of the activities of daily living, and there's 6 of them. Whether it's bathing, moving continents and so forth. I mean, if you cannot perform two of those, then you qualify for long-term care. But are you self-insuring, or are you self-assuring that long-term care issue? We'll talk a little bit about that in the next few minutes. And those are things that are very important. I wrote a couple of more notes. For instance, the only way you're going to be able to overcome the fact that there's a high probability that you may live a long life in retirement, if you have pensions, whether it's a private pension or a public pension, at least you're going to have a guaranteed income for life. If you have Social Security benefits coming into you, that's a guaranteed income for life. By the way, those two things right there, they're annuities. Now, if you don't have a pension and you have Social Security benefits only, did you know that you could actually set up your own private pension? And you can do so through the use of guaranteed annuities. And by the way, to make it simple, think of a guaranteed annuity as a guaranteed paycheck for life. So the more guaranteed paychecks that you have coming to you and your family for the rest of your life, the better prepared you're going to be in order to meet the potential liabilities of running out of money before you run out of life, because you live a long life in retirement. So once again, I can go into a lot more details on that. I do have videos regarding annuities and the different types and how do you segment them and what percentage of your retirement portfolio should be in annuities and so forth. But that would be for another conversation. But feel free to look me up either on YouTube or my podcast channel in order to learn more about that. Now, the other thing is that in retirement, especially for those of you that are living a long life, life insurance, again, can become asset protection as opposed to just death protection. So when we talk about the risk of dying too soon, when you self-assured by transferring that risk from an insurance company, basically you were just buying death benefit where, money was money in escrow, as I call it, from a real estate standpoint. And money closes the day you die. So the point in time that you leave this world, which is the most important and critical time for your family, that's when an insurance company is going to step in and replace you in your income from an economic perspective. Now, they're not going to be able to replace you, from a personal or a sentimental standpoint, but they will be able to step into your shoes and replace you from an economic perspective, and that's incredible. Now, when it comes to the risk of living too long, life insurance also plays a major role, because there's something called in the marketplace pension maximization that gives you the ability to increase your retirement paychecks many times, 5 times over, just because of the fact that you have life insurance. Now, we don't have time to go into that one as well, because once again, we're on our Facebook Live, and I don't want to take a tremendous amount of your time. But you can feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions, and if you want to know exactly what you need to do in order to be able to increase those paychecks, 5-fold or 3-fold or 10-fold, depending on your age and your health, without having to worry about running out of money before you run out of life. So we've talked a little bit about the risk of dying too soon. We've talked a little bit about the risk of living too long. Now, let me address the risk of living with a disability, which is, very, very prevalent for all of us in the United States and for all of you watching this segment today. Just to give you some statistical information, 70% of all Americans are going to have some kind of a long-term care issue and concern in retirement. And also think of it this way. Once again, the longer you live in retirement, the higher the propensity for you to experience long-term care issues and concerns. I was able to get some numbers out of the government a couple of weeks ago, which I want to share with you. If you have a husband and wife in retirement, there's a 46% probability that one of them is going to have a need for long-term care. And all of a sudden, when you start having long-term care, if you haven't really protected yourself and your family from that fatal 4, that risk number 3 of the fatal 4, then now you may have to, no choice but to dip into more additional assets out of your retirement accounts in order to mitigate and offset the additional cost of long-term care. What do you think that's going to do to your retirement assets? Obviously, they're going to be depleting a lot faster. And then once you pass away, what is going to be left over for your surviving spouse? So that's where understanding and managing the risk of the fatal flaw is so important. And I know you don't have to say this. The vast majority of you have never looked that far into your retirement plan to truly understand, what are the booby traps and what are the challenges that you're going to have to face at some point in time in the future, because you may find yourself, like I used to do in the Marine Corps when I was in infantry training and throughout my infantry career in the Marine Corps, you may find yourself in a situation where you have to deal with, control chaos. And the word control and the word chaos usually don't go together, from a financial standpoint, but in the Marine Corps it does. But if you have the ability to bring both together and make sure that they work congruently, then you have done a really good job for yourself and your family from that perspective. Also, 90% of couples that are age 65 or older are going to need long-term care. I didn't say 50%, I didn't say 70%, I said 90% of couples are going to need long-term care, are going to have a need for long-term care, or will be exposed to long-term care issues and concerns before they die. That's a major, major problem. By the way, there are many advisors out there that use Monte Carlo calculations. I don't know if you guys have heard of any of those, but Monte Carlo calculations it's a software program that will identify the probability of your retirement plan being a success or a failure over a long period of time. So usually they'll do anywhere between 10,000 and 30,000 calculations, and they figure out what are the probability of failures along those lines. Now, when you do a Monte Carlo simulation, if your advisor is doing it for you, and they have a 97% probability of success, then they feel pretty good about it, and you as a client may feel pretty good. Now, if you happen to be on that 3%, then obviously that's a big issue. Can you imagine getting on an airplane and thinking that you have a 97% probability that you're going to make it from point A to point B? How comfortable are you going to be sitting on that chair? Now, all of us would want 100% probability, and many a times that's easier said than done unless you do proper planning. Now, the challenge is that all of these Monte Carlo simulations have never factored in the probabilities of long-term care and disabilities in retirement. Because once you factor those calculations in, then the probability of success in those Monte Carlo simulations drop from 97% to 46%. Now, let me ask you the same question. If you were getting into an airplane and the pilot says, hey guys, thank you so much. This is American Airlines flight 254 going from Miami to LAX. Our flying time is going to be 5 hours and 44 minutes at an altitude of 33,000 feet. I have done some Monte Carlo calculations, and based on the weight and the number of people that we have in this plane and the amount of fuel that we're taking, there's a 46% probability that we're going to make it safely to LAX. So buckle up. We're going to be closing the doors and we'll be ready to go in the next few minutes. Now, how many of you are going to stay sitting on your seats? And how many of you are going to take that plunge and getting into that flight going from Miami to LAX, Los Angeles International Airport? I would say none of you would take those odds. So the same thing happens in retirement. The problem is that most of you and most of your financial advisors have never taken those things into consideration. And many times, the job that I do for the vast majority of my clients is I try to save them from themselves because they really don't understand the complexities. By the way, saving money for retirement is the easy part. Once you get to that retirement age, and now you're going to start the distribution aspect of your life, that's where it becomes really, really complex and really scary if you don't know how to do it, or if you don't know and you don't have that proper guide or person that can walk you through all the booby traps and make sure that you go around them instead of trying to get through them. Another point that I can make here is that once again, you can either self-insure or you can self-assure. And by the same token, if you want to self-assure, there are a lot of products out there. You can buy long-term care policies standalone, and they have pros and cons to those. You can also purchase hybrid life insurance contracts, and these are some of the newer life insurance contracts that we do a lot of life insurance all the time because a lot of our clients have owned insurance for many, many years, and they've owned it before they came to see us. So we do an audit on all the contracts that they have. But some of these hybrid contracts give you the ability to make certain that someone will always get a benefit. So you get double the benefit for your dollars. So you have a life insurance contract that can protect you in case of a premature death. And you can also have the same life insurance contract that will protect you in case you have a need for additional funding because you have a long-term care issue and concern in your life. So again, there's another conversation that we will be having as to how these products work, but I just wanted to bring it to the forefront and let it sink in for you. And then last but not least, so we've talked about the risk of dying too soon, the risk of living too long, the risk of living with a disability. And then last but not least, I want to talk about the risk of dealing with eroding factors. My definition of an eroding factor is anything that can erode the value of your money in retirement. Remember, retirement is about guaranteed cash flow, a guaranteed paycheck, obviously, it's the same thing. And if you can do so on a tax-free basis, then obviously you have icing on the cake. So what are some of the major eroding factors that I deal with when it comes to doing all these types of plans for my client and providing them with a tactical retirement blueprint, which is something that I specialize in. Number one is taxation, and we're seeing it today. In 6 years from now, taxes are going to be higher than they are today because a new tax law will sunset December 31st, 2025. Take a look at the national debt in this country. Take a look at the unfunded liabilities for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Medicare Part D. Take a look at the COVID-19 and all the additional debt that we're adding to this country, and who's going to pay for that? And by the way, the only way that the government can recover a lot of that is by increasing taxes to the vast majority of Americans. And most of us that are middle class are the ones that are going to be bearing the front end of those taxation. So if you don't do anything with your retirement assets in order to create a tax-free shelter around those assets, then now, whenever taxes go up in the future, then you're going to find yourself in a position that you have no way out. And by the way, your personal income taxes may even go up, even if you don't have, if taxes were not to go up in the future, which I doubt that very much. Why? Because when you retire, you're no longer making contributions to your 401ks and IRAs, so you're not taking that deduction. If your home is paid for, almost paid for, either you're paying very little toward interest because the vast majority of your mortgage payments are going toward principal at that point in time, or your mortgage is paid for completely, so you can't take a mortgage deduction. Your kids are hopefully out of the house, but even if they're not, you cannot take neither a deduction or exemption for them. And then if you were making contributions to a charitable organization, once you get retirement, my experience is that you start to devote a little bit more of your time as opposed to money. Therefore, your deductions are going to be lesser. So even if taxes were not to go up in the future, the probability that your taxes are going to be greater is going to be higher than not. And by the way, the only way you're going to find yourself in a lower tax bracket is either because you were a financial failure in your entire life, or you have done a proper tactical retirement blueprint and you have had time on your side to get it done and get it implemented so you can avoid the taxation in the future. The second one that I want to talk about regarding an eroding factor is inflation. Inflation is just like a heart attack. It's a silent killer. It's the one that is killing each and every one of us every day, because inflation is all around us. We can feel it. Just try to go to the grocery stores and see the cost of inflation. Just so you'll know, inflation is not tax deductible. So if you have an inflation rate of 3.5%, on top of that, you have to add your tax bracket, because if you're investing your money and you want to pay the taxes on an annual basis, and then what remains should be able to either stay with inflation or stay ahead of inflation. So inflation is not tax deductible. And let me tell you how bad it is. At a 4% inflation rate, just in 20 years, 50% of your purchasing power goes away. So whatever you could buy today for $1, it would cost you $1.50 to be able to purchase in 20 years from now. Or if you want to look at it the other way, $1 20 years from now will only be able to purchase 50 cents worth of goods today. So that's how bad this inflation is. And by the way, if you go out 30 years, then 2/3 or 66% of that purchasing power goes totally away. So you have to be able to manage this significantly and be able to do it the right way with the right products in place. The third one, obviously, we're dealing with it today, is stock market volatility. You know, stock market goes up and down, and most of you your assets are overemphasized in the stock market. So that is the reason why your 401k may have already become a 201k, or your IRAs have depleted in value tremendously. By the way, when you're in retirement, you cannot afford a bear market. And bear markets do happen every 5 years. Now, we went through the longest bull market in American history, lasted anywhere between 10 to 12 years. But now we're in bear market territory. And who knows what's going to happen with this COVID-19 and the impact that that's going to have in the United States on unemployment, foreclosures, bankruptcies, both personal and business bankruptcies. So those are issues that all of us are going to have to deal with. And what's going to be the impact on your retirement assets from that perspective? Interest rate volatility will also create all kinds of havocs to all of you, because you can no longer flee to safety. So if you go into a CD, CDs nowadays are paying 0 point nothing. So what are you going to do? You're going to have to take more risk, or you can do a tactical retirement blueprint and make certain that you do the right things at the right time and for the right reasons. There are products available in the marketplace that will allow you to participate in the upside potential of the stock market returns, but never participate in the downside. So that way your principal and the interest that you gain on an annual basis is totally protected from stock market volatility. In this situation, I would say that zero would be a hero for you. So that means that the worst that you can do in these accounts is that you get a 0 rate of return for the year. Because you cannot lose. I don't care if the market is down 50%, you cannot lose a single dollar. The question is, what percentage of your assets should be in those kinds of annuities that will provide those guarantees? What percentage of your assets should be in fixed annuities that can provide, a steady income, cash flow coming into you on an annual basis, whether you need that money or not? And then can you start doing some Roth conversion so you can pay the tax today, because we're living at the 3rd lowest historical tax rate in the history of our country, and then shifting your retirement assets from forever taxed to never taxed again. So those are things that are important. But then, at the end of the day, when I have clients coming in to see me on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, 100% of them have never ever looked at their retirement plan and their retirement decisions through the scope of the Fatal 4. Managing the risk of dying too soon, managing the risk of living too long, managing the risk of living with a disability and what that bears, and then last but not least, managing the risk of living with eroding factors. So, a tactical retirement blueprint would be paramount for each and every one on this call. And by the way, if you just want to pick my brain, feel free to reach out to me. My number is area code 786-766-1042. You can also send me an email at Bert, B-E-R-T, BertSalazar.com, BertSalazar.com, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. And always remember that my goal for each and every one of you is to kind of help you change the way that you see things, because when you change the way that you see things, the things that you see change. Let me see if I have anyone on Facebook that has made some comments. For those of you that have made comments, I appreciate that. Hey, John, thanks very much for joining me. That's very nice for you to join us this afternoon. Mark, the same thing. Sylvia, the same for you. I have a number of people, but I don't want to take any more of your time. So once again, guys, thanks so much for giving me a little bit of your time today. Stay safe. Keep that social distancing away. We need to open this economy because if we don't open this economy, all of those issues and concerns that I talk about the fatal four and the eroding factors are going to precipitate to the point of no return. So with that being said, take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.